Longlegs is being deemed the scariest movie of the summer, the year, and even the decade. This, along with the praise of it being a masterpiece with a 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, made me beyond excited to check it out. After seeing it, is it worth all of the hype? Does Nic Cage really deserve that Oscar? And is Maika more the new Scream Queen? I'll be talking about that and much more in this video without giving any spoilers away. And guys, this movie is good. Before we get into more of my thoughts, let me know what you guys thought of Longlegs in the comments down below, and over 98% of you guys who watch the videos aren't yet subscribed, so if you don't want to miss out on more of my reviews or reactions, hit that button. But without wasting any more time, let's get into it. There's a lot to talk about with this movie, but I want to start with Maika Monroe, who is essentially what this movie rides on. She is absolutely amazing, no doubt about it, carries this film from the first second to the final second. I'll talk about Nic Cage later in this video. He is in this movie. He is a very big and important character, but in regards to what performance carries the film throughout, Maika Monroe is top on this list.
Is it scary being a lady FBI agent?
Yeah.
And I have to tiptoe around a bunch of things because I don't want to give any spoilers away, but I do want to talk about my biggest problem of this film because I think Maika Monroe is the highlight, but sadly I think the overall writing is the biggest downside to this film. Now, I think the character work itself is actually pretty great, which has been a complaint from a lot of other people, but I think the way that the story is so integrated into Maika Monroe's character makes not only her character, but the overall story of this serial killer Zodiac type of story super interesting. And again, I know a lot of people were saying that this film lacked a lot of depth, but I personally felt the exact opposite way. Where I think this movie kind of fell apart was the overall story writing. Yes, it is tight, but it's not very consistent. Without giving any specifics away, I think the final act just spells out way too many things to the audience. And I like the final act as an overall idea, but it leaves the wrong things to thought. It spells out too many things that we already know as an audience, and where this movie deviates into something completely different than you'd expect is where that third act really goes and how deep into that they get. And what it deviates into is this religious horror idea. Now, I'm not going to talk about specifics and how we get there, what happens when we get there, and how we even get to that point in regards to Maika Monroe and Nic Cage's characters, because that is where this movie excels. The reasonings and how we get to these points before the final act is what is so intriguing and thrilling and exhilarating about this film. It deviating into a religious horror is a big pro as well as a very big con. As for the pro, I think it takes a completely different stab at this subgenre of horror, I guess. I'm going to talk about the scares in this film in just a second here. But rather being the birth of Christ or a nun movie or an exorcist movie, this never is packaged as a religious horror, which I'm glad it wasn't, but I also think the way that they promoted this movie is kind of misinforming in a few different ways. Obviously, there's comparisons to The Shining, but it deviates from that at a certain point, which I'm not mad about. Again, I think it's a really cool concept. I just don't think it was handled the best. But the biggest con of this religious horror is the fact that it gets very predictable. Once you get to a certain point, at least me and the friends that were sitting next to me, we all kind of knew what was going to happen. We knew where this story was going, where characters themselves were going, and I think with the overall like paranormal ideas, they were super unique and super interesting. And that's where I think Nic Cage's character is the best utilized in regards to further explaining things that we truly have no idea about in the first act of the film. But the fact that it's so predictable, and then the fact that it's also not a very scary movie, that all kind of combines to make a movie underwhelming. I get scared very easily. Like, I was sitting with my jacket above my mouth the whole movie. Like, there was tension, and it was creepy and unsettling. But that's not to say that this movie was truly scary. I didn't feel chills down my spine. I felt unsettled in regards to the makeup and the effects and where this story was headed. The core writing itself of our lead character, those are the things that were scary. Visually, not a lot of this movie works aside from the 1 to 2 really great sound design moments and the visual scares. And that's where I get into the pacing of this film, because I think a lot of the thriller and Zodiac serial killer ideas are very completely pretty much the whole movie. Like, I was going to say they're present, but it's literally the entire film for the first 2 parts of this movie. And the final part of this movie is pretty much the religious horror aspect of it, which I don't mind. I think goes in an interesting direction, but it feels so jagged when it's split up that it kind of becomes a little bit uninteresting to me. Aside from everything I said, and obviously Maika Moore's amazing performance, I think the biggest highlight of this film is the visuals. It is visually, dare I say, perfect. We actually don't know many of the details on how this film was shot. There's a bunch of different aspect ratio changes, which I really enjoyed. The technical use of not only voiceovers to explain the Zodiac and serial killer story, but the way that the visuals, CGI, the visual storytelling, not just in regards to characters themselves, the way everything is played out is perfectly timed. And that's within moments themselves, not the overall parts, like I said before. A lot of people have talked about this, but I do agree with everyone when they say that this movie truly feels eerie just off of the visuals because of how much negative space there is, and it's something we're really not used to in movie making. Maika Moore, whenever she's in the frame, seems to be smaller than I am. And in that, it leaves so much area around us to just look around. Even if there's nothing happening, it just creates automatic suspense that is well worth it because obviously something does end up happening. This movie has a lot of quick cuts, sound bites, sound editing, as well as just quick visual cues that you don't really know what it means in the moment, but it's just super unsettling, but it kind of comes together at the end, which I really, really liked. It is a little bit of a corny way to do it, but I really like it, and I think it works in regards to everything is already so unsettling that it just adds another layer on top of it. But the final thing I want to talk about is Nic Cage's performance. And the reason I save this for the end is because it is a very interesting performance in the sense that he's not in the movie for very long. And I feel like that's where I'll kind of end in regards to talking about him, his character himself. It's not Oscar worthy. I don't know what people were talking about, but I guess pre-hype aside, I think this is one of his better career performances in general. Not only is he creepy and unsettling, kind of in a Joker-esque sense in my opinion, but I think specifically in this interrogation sequence that we see in the film, goes so well opposite of Maika Moore, not even in a way of they're talking back and forth in a conversation. He's literally just saying random that doesn't really make sense to her in the moment. But it's interesting because he is so deeply rooted in the backstory of this, not only serial killer, but the overall story that we're learning about Maika Moore's character. And so I don't know if it's necessarily as much Nic Cage's performance as it is also just the brilliant writing of Maika Moore's character that entangles these characters so well together.
And all in the sign of one word: Longlegs.
I know you're not afraid of a little bit of dark. Because you are the dark.
But overall, this movie is very different than you're going to go in expecting, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. You might enjoy it more because it deviates your expectations, but for me, it wasn't an amazing kind of road to cross. I'm going to give Longlegs an 8 out of 10. Again, let me know what you guys think of this film in the comments down below. Did it live up to the hype? Were you disappointed? Let me know all your thoughts. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.